Garrett Prestige has been involved with the Australian gay men's response to HIV from the outset, and I think I understand you did the very first research on gay men relative to the epidemic survey work in the early 80s.
Dangerous.
He's affiliated with both the Kirby Institute and the Australian Research Centre in Sex, Health and Society. He's responsible for many, many studies of gay men in Australia that have directly contributed to gay community responses to HIV and other STIs. Garrett?
Thanks. So I'm going to focus on gay men because that's who I work with, and I'm also going to focus largely on PrEP because I think that's where the rub of where we're at really is. And in a recent online column, Michael Lasala wrote, "I've sat in on meetings of HIV researchers and prevention specialists who offered dark interpretations of why gay men are not consistently using condoms, such as low self-esteem, poverty, stigma, substance use and mental illness. What was missing from these discussions of HIV risk are issues of desire and sexual pleasure. And for me, that sums up the problem exactly. Because according to most of the data that I've seen, especially here in Australia, the men who appear to take the most risk tend to be well-informed, self-accepting, well-supported. I'm not saying that there aren't some who fit the victim profile, but most don't. And that doesn't make for an easy case for policy and program development. It's much easier when you can say, oh, they just need counselling and the right information and then they'll behave themselves. But actually, when faced with the opportunity to have a good time, they've probably just decided to go ahead with it instead of living in morbid fear, as they once might have. And many gay men, once they've been properly informed about the effects of treatments on preventing transmission, are keen to have that option available to them, particularly those at increased risk. This does just seem to me to be arguing around the edges though. Treatments work, so do condoms. Neither are 100% effective, but they can be close to it. In practice, while we seem to expect 100% condom use, at least during casual sex, that's never been the case, even at the peak of the epidemic. And we know that increasingly, gay men are being less consistent about it. Someone said online recently that telling people not to use PrEP is akin to telling someone they shouldn't take anti-malarials and just don't travel to places where malaria is present. But people have the annoying habit of making their own choices about relative risk versus potential reward. And it isn't always the same as what might be expected within a very narrow public health perspective. One concern is that gay men won't use PrEP consistently, and so it will be less effective because of that, which could happen. But we don't argue that we should abandon the dependence on condoms as a prevention strategy just because some men, actually quite a lot, don't use them consistently. We look for ways to complement them with other strategies and we try to help men use them effectively. Surely we should treat PrEP in the same way. And regardless, in the context of good access to appropriate information services, gay men, at least, appear to be pretty good at adherence. Where that's a problem, it says more about health and education services than it does about gay men's capacity. I suspect that's true of any population group. And then there's the concern that men will be encouraged to discard condoms. But it's hard to see this as anything other than thinly disguised moralism. For some, they think that gay men who don't consistently use condoms are irresponsible, even though there's never been 100% use by all gay men on the one hand, and yet, on the other hand, and something that Udi's just alluded to, throughout the epidemic, rates of condom use among gay men have consistently remained at levels that sexual health professionals could only dream of among heterosexual populations. So the idea that gay men as a group are irresponsible is just not supportable. Ignoring these facts rather than allowing access to PrEP is simply saying that if gay men don't behave appropriately, then they deserve whatever happens to them. But overlaying this is the fear that gay men will all just turn into rampaging whores. And the whole Truvada whore debate that's occurred in the US highlights this. Stigmatising people for using an effective prevention strategy because it might encourage other behaviour that you don't approve of is just moralistic. After all, Condoms make it easier to be a slut and avoid infection too. Besides, there's no actual evidence that gay men are wholesale abandoning condom use in the context of PrEP. It just makes their existing behaviour safer. And it removes the need to constantly worry about the possibility of infection. The either-or dichotomy of the PrEP debate is simply silly fear-mongering. Nobody is arguing to abandon condoms or stop safe sex campaigns in favour of PrEP. But even if some do use PrEP to abandon condoms, well, what business is it of yours? This is where I think that some social researchers have failed to grasp the potential for using these biomedical tools as an opportunity for advancing sexual liberation. Instead, they focused on the dreadful prospect of biomedicalisation. Our enemy is HIV, and one of the primary tasks in the fight against HIV was always to counter the potential for sex negativity and repression that came with HIV. Here is a tool that could free us from the fear of sex that's gripped gay men for over 30 years. PrEP could allow us to return to the struggle to free up, to liberate everyone's sexuality once more. But instead, a few, but some, social researchers have climbed in bed with the sexual moralists in our own communities to feed the conspiracy theories about drug companies and clinicians. It's anti-science and anti-sex and anti-gay. But you know, if we want to contest the power of pharmaceutical companies, then there's a fight that's far more worthy of attention: the issue of cost. Treatments are expensive, or at least they're expensive if we continue to abide by the drug companies' rules. The cost of PrEP is too burdensome for some people, unless, of course, they step outside the strict rules and import generic drugs that are available online for their own use at a fraction of the price. I suspect that if we don't find a workable solution to how to implement PrEP everywhere, then eventually we'll see increasing numbers of people doing precisely that. And social research could play a key role in liberating access to treatments from the power of the drug companies, instead of obsessing about the use of the treatments themselves. Ultimately, this is about choice. Just as when women face the label of being a slut by going on the pill, yet in many ways the pill empowered women because it gave them the power to decide their own level of risk of pregnancy. And indeed, if some women wanted to be a slut, the pills made that more possible as well. PrEP offers some similar advantages in terms of empowering people to take charge of HIV prevention and make their own choices about what works best for them in what circumstances. And of course, if you actually believe the science, the treatments work, then letting people make their own choices shouldn't be a threat to anyone, unless you really just don't think that people should be able to make their own kind of fun. Thanks.
Thank you.